This is the fastest method to reading music. Your piano teacher, Tim here, and I'm going to tell you right off the bat that the fastest method to reading music is intervals. But I'm going to go into a lot more detail about it, about how to use intervals, how to practice them, and some other techniques you can use along with them to read music super fast. An interval is the distance between two notes. So if I have C and then I play D, that's a second. 1, 2. If I play a note like C and then I skip a note to E, that is what we call a third. 1, 2, 3. And then intervals extend. They can continue to fourths, fifths, sixths, sevenths, eighths, but we don't call them eighths, we call them octaves. You may know that already. And they can continue to ninths, tenths, and so on. But as a beginner, you're mostly going to be working from seconds to octaves. And here's how intervals can help you read music really fast. So the lines of the treble clef from the bottom to the top are E, G, B, D, and F. So this note right here is F. And I can tell you right now that that note's C, and I figured that out lightning fast by using intervals. I didn't even think about what letter it was. So what I did was I knew that top line was F, and if you know your lines and spaces, you'll know that that's F. And then I know that this note, because I can see it visually, is a fifth apart from F, making it C. Now your next question hopefully is,
Tim, how do I identify intervals on the staff?
Well, of course I have you covered. This right here is a second. They are so close together that they have to kind of like smush on top of one another, because if I move the interval up, you can see then it kind of stacks vertically like a snowman. So right away, especially if it's harmonic, meaning they're played at the same time, you can identify a second super duper easily. And as you can see, just like they're right next to each other on the staff, they're right next to each other on the piano. And what I want to tell you is all even number intervals, that's 2, 4, 6, 8, you remember second grade math class, all even number intervals don't match. Now what do I mean by that? Well, if one's on a space, like this one, the other one's on a line. If the one's on a line, the other one has to be on a space. So I know that's an even number interval right away because they don't match. So what interval is that one? Hopefully you knew that's a second right away. Here is a fourth. So 2, 4, 6, 8, remember? So a fourth is a little bit further apart. They don't match. Now, one thing I do want to mention about all these intervals is the bottom one can be a line, but then the top one has to be a space. So remember, they just don't match. It doesn't matter what order they appear in. This one is also a fourth. A sixth also doesn't match, but you can see that there's a little bit more of a gap going on between there. And when you first start, you may find a little trouble discerning the difference between 4 and 6. Just remember that 6 has a bigger gap to it. And then what's after 6? 8, right? No, well, technically it's 8. It's actually, remember, called octave. So when you ever have a note and you have that same note just in a different spot, there they are, that is called an octave. And do you expect an octave to match? No, right? Because it's an even number interval, and even number intervals don't match. Odd number intervals do match. Oh, gee, and we have line and line there, and they could just as easily be space and space. It's the same interval no matter where on the piano you have it. And that interval you may have discerned is a third, because we're going from the line E to the next line. And if you know your lines of the treble clef, E, G, B, D, F, from the bottom to the top, you will know that that's a G, and we have basically double checked our answer. Now, all odd number intervals do match. So 3, 5, you can tell that there's like a very even space between those. 7, there's actually 2 lines or spaces in between them. Pretty even spacing there. Remember that that's not an octave. A lot of people look at that and be like, oh, that's clearly an octave. You know, it's far apart. How do you know it's not an octave, right? They match. So it has to be a 7th. And then 9, I guess I could show you. A 9 will take up the entirety of the staff. Question, is this an even number interval or an odd number interval? Well, they don't match, right? So it must be even. And what number do you think that is? Do you think it's a second? Well, let's play it on the piano. Well, that's pretty far apart, right? So it can't be second. A second would be there. I even think a fourth isn't quite there, because remember, a fourth would be right here. Instead, there'll only be a little bit of a gap in there. So this must be a sixth from G to E. And let's make sure we're right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Got them. Now there's another element to intervals called interval quality, but we're going to get to that at the end of the lesson because it's a bit more complicated and there's some things you need to understand first. So here we have Jingle Bells, and this is what we're going to be using as an example, at least the opening couple of measures here. Now you may be looking at this, you may be saying, well, this looks quite a bit different than the stuff you were showing a few minutes ago where you were stacking notes on top of each other, also called harmony, if you want to know. This has notes kind of scattered all over the place because this is a real piece to play. And I'm going to show you how to use intervals to help you out with this piece. So right away, you can look at intervals, up and down like this, but you can also look at intervals from left to right in the melody. So what is that interval there from D to B? Do they match? No, they don't match. So it must be some kind of even number interval, and it's a little further apart, and I'll just give you that's a sixth right away. So that helps me when I'm processing the notes. Not only do I know my lines and spaces, E, G, B, D, F, F, A, C, E, things like that, but I can also use intervals to be like, oh, that's a sixth, and that kind of helps me put my hand in the right position right away. And then if I'm looking at this note, from this note to this note, what is that? That is a third, right? They both match, and they're not too far away. By the way, I want to mention a chord is just stacked thirds. Just kind of a trivia for you. But anyway, the whole point is that when I'm going through this, I can be like, oh, that's a sixth. I only really need to read the bottom note, F, and I know that 6 away, is just extending your pinky one. And it can really help process and read through the notes much, much, much faster. It's especially helpful when you have jazz chords where you have a lot of stacked intervals all at once. Maybe I'll show you some examples at the end. Let's practice some intervals, and I got to teach you how you should be practicing them. Okay, when you're ready to practice your intervals after this lesson is over, you want to click on exercises, and then when you want to scroll down to interval notification. Just like I've taught you, well, if you saw that video with the note identification, you want to click on the little gear at the top, and you want to make sure that you only have the notes that you are familiar with selected. So what we're going to do is we're going to try 7 examples, and all you got to do is figure out the number interval that it is, and then I'm actually going to play it on the piano just to show you where it's going to be. So I'm going to give you 5 seconds. Ready? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. These 2 notes match. That's how you know it's an odd number interval. And as you can see, there's an even space between them in that line. So this must be a fifth. And these notes, here's E. And then that, by knowing that's a fifth, I know that note's an A. Oh, once again, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here's the explanation. They're line to line. That's got to be a third, right? They match. Odd number intervals close together, and that would be right there, by the way. Oh, this one, I'm going to give you 5 seconds for real this time. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. These do not match, therefore it's an even number interval. There's quite a bit of distance between them, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say that that's a sixth from, or wait, no. Sorry. It's even further than that. That's why you double check sometimes. I thought it was going to be a sixth, but it's actually an octave. This is a strategy that you can use in conjunction with intervals to read notes faster. And how I want you to do this is start from C and skip up the piano until you hit C again and say the letters out loud. C, E, G, B, D, F, A, C, and we're back to C again. And then I want you to practice that going backwards. C, A, F, D, B, G, E, C. Now do that without playing them. So C, E, G, B, D, F, A, C, and then backwards. C, A, F, D, B, G, E, C. Now, what is the point to this? Well, let me explain. Let's say I have these 2 notes, and I'm pretty good with the notes on the staff. Remember, the spaces of the treble clef are F, A, C, E. This one's a C then. And the question is, what is that top note? It's so far up there. Well, remember this sequence, C, E, G, B, D, F, A, C, right? So we're starting on C here. This is where C is at. And we have to count. We're going to skip each one until we get to our desired note. So here's C, and each time we skip is just going to be another space there. And so we're starting on C. We go up one to E, G, B, and that note D. So you can use that skipping technique, C, E, G, B, D, F, A, C, to quickly skip notes up and down on the keyboard. That's why I told you to do it backwards, to figure out some of those ledger lines or some of those other notes. The whole goal of this lesson is to give your brain as much information to go on so that you're able to pick out that information and process the notes much, much faster. And of course, I have some more strategies coming up. One more example with the skipping technique. So we have the bottom line E, right? E, G, B, D, F is the lines. And we have to figure out what that bottom note is. And we're going to use our skipping technique once again to find it. So we have E, down to the next line is C, A, and that one's an F. Knowing that you probably struggle with ledger lines like most students do, I'm going to give you 4 ledger line rules. Actually, I've condensed them into only 2 ledger line rules that are going to help you master ledger lines in just a few minutes. Rule number 1, the lines of a clef are equal to the spaces going up off that clef or going down below that clef. Let me show you what I mean. So here we're looking at this measure in the middle, and just like I said, the lines of the clef are equal to the spaces going up off the clef, starting from that top space. And what that means is if the lines are E, G, B, D, F, these spaces are E, G, B, D, F. And you can use that to read the high up ledger lines really, really fast. Now remember, I also said the lines of a clef are equal to the spaces going down off the clef. So if the lines are E, G, B, D, and F, these spaces are E, G, B, D, and F. You just got to be careful that when you're going down and you're figuring out ledger lines down here, you're going to have to be counting backwards, right? Since we're basically going from this top line here and then going down. So instead of E, G, B, D, F, you're really going to be saying F, D, B, G, E. And the same is true for the bass clef. Just make sure you use the bass clef lines and spaces. G, B, D, F, A. And this is G, B, D, F, A, except we're going down. So it's A, F, D, B, G, E. Ledger line rule number 2 is the opposite. So the spaces of a clef are equal to the lines going up off the clef and the lines going down below the clef, just in reverse order, remember. Let me show you what that's about. So here we have the spaces of the treble clef, F, A, C, E. And guess what? The lines are F, A, C, E. Here we have the opposite, just in the bass clef this time, spaces A, C, E, G. And this one, remember, you're starting from the top and going down, so it's really G, E, C, A. Another thing that can help you read music way faster that you can use in addition to intervals, everything else, is landmarks. Landmarks are notes that you can identify from sight right away. And in this case, both of these are Fs. And for some reason, I can always just immediately looking, even from when I first started reading music, I could see those notes and be like, oh, those are Fs. I know what those are. And so what that means is that if you have like these notes going across, I know that that's F. And so that's A, F, E, F. Just finding them in relation to those notes that you know. So I always like the bottom space, top line, same thing with the bass clef, except that it would be what notes instead? A and A. Another great one a lot of people like that I recommend is C and C, because you can find middle C pretty quickly. And a lot of people just are very familiar with where C is on the keyboard already. So the whole concept of note reading is going from reading individual notes, remember E, G, B, D, and F, to moving on to looking at them in groups. And that's kind of what intervals was all about, seconds, thirds, fourths, fifths, and so on. But there's actually even another step that you can take that's really going to help, and that's looking at music in even larger patterns. Let's take a look at a real-world example, and I can show you what patterns I'm going to be looking out for even before I put my hands on the keys. So I can play this piece without any forethought and just go right into it. However, that's not going to work as well. What I should be looking out for are the following things. Taking a look at this first measure here, I notice that it is outlining a C major chord. And if you know your chords, that's why we memorize all of our chords, you know right away, you're like, oh, that's C major. But it's not just in a block chord, is it? It's actually in an arpeggio. So immediately that tells me I'm only playing the notes C, E, and G, right? It makes it really hard to mess up those first two measures, because if you hit anything outside of that arpeggio, you know you're messing up. Some of the things right away I notice, scale type of patterns. Now a lot of times you're not going to see scales go right in a row on pieces. I mean, you will see that, but what you're going to see more of is this type of thing, where it was like almost a scale, right? But they kind of played around with the notes to create a melody, and you're going to see that very commonly. But it really still helps to understand that I'm doing a scale pattern here. We're probably going to have some finger crosses, and sure enough, we do. And we're in the key of C, so we know that we're not messing with any sharps or flats, anything like that. So knowing your scales really helps. Going down into the second line, right away I see more arpeggios. However, is there really a difference between this one and this one? Well, let's play it. Yup, it actually went from this inversion, and that's what, so when we take our chords and we move them in different orders, we call that an inversion. And you can see right here, we have this inversion. And then we play the same chord, we just change it back to what we call root position, meaning the notes are evenly stacked. But those two arpeggios are the same chord. So it gives you more information to go on there. Looking ahead, this is kind of a meandering pattern. It's not really a scale until you get right here. And actually, they're even starting it from what's called the leading tone. So here's a G major scale, and I know that we're playing a G major scale right away because I see that F sharp there. I actually see it twice, and that tells you G major. And actually, starting on that measure also starts on a G. That kind of gives it away also. So because I know that scale, I can play it really, really fast. Let's fast forward to the last measure here. What is going on here? And I said this in the beginning, right? This isn't a chord, or is it? It sort of is. What does that sound like to you? It sounds like an inversion. That's right. So knowing your chords, knowing your inversions, knowing your scales are all things you want to be on the lookout for, because it's really going to help you learn music a whole lot faster. There's actually more to it, and I even alluded to it in the beginning with these advanced interval things. Remember this? I said that the interval was a distance between two different notes. So remember I said that's a second, right? 1, 2. A question for you. What is this? You're like, ooh, what is that? It's still 2 away, right? 1, 2. But there's a difference. This is called a major second. It sort of sounds like the beginning to Happy Birthday. And then a minor second sounds more tense, right? Sounds like the beginning of Jaws. So a major second is a whole step away. And I guess I should explain what half steps and whole steps are. So when you're moving up the piano and you're moving up every note, that's what's called moving up in half step. Like this note, D and D sharp, are a half step away. When you put two half steps together, you get a whole step. And you're also going to see people refer to these as semitones and whole tones. So semitone is a half step, whole tone is a whole step. And you got to be a little careful because on your sheet music, it's not always going to be apparent if one is a major second or minor second. For example, this one, F and G, well, you can look at it on the piano and tell that that's a major second. But let's do another example. What if I move them right here? This looks the same, right? It's just two notes. There's no flats on any of these notes. It looks the same. Looks like a minor second or a major second, but it is not. This is a minor second. You have to be careful that whenever you're talking about the distance between two notes, and you get like to an E, keep in mind that there's no black key between E and F. So a half step above E is F, right? So like this sort of thing is actually a minor second because it's right there on the piano. So you always want to double check just to make sure. It's really all you have to watch out for between E and F and the other one I played, B and C. A minor second can have an easy giveaway though if it's not between E and F or B and C and the top note has a flat on it, like that. If you see something like that, you know right away you're dealing with a minor second. Also the opposite of that, if you sharp the bottom note and the top one is a regular note, as long as it's not between E and F or B and C, remember, that's a minor second. So sometimes a minor second can be identified by sight, but not always. You got to double check. And you're going to see these intervals in your music all the time, so it's really helpful to become familiar with not only just the numbered intervals, which is what I recommend you start with, but start learning these actual qualities as well. And that's actually going to really help you later on when you start learning about chords and chord progressions and harmonies. What are these two notes? Well, C and E, right? And that's a third. 1, 2, 3. But what if I flat the top note, C to E flat? 1, 2, 3. What do you think this one's called? It's actually called a minor third. Just like we had a minor second, we have a minor third, which is 1, 2, 3 half steps away from your starting note. And it's going to look like this. So just like our seconds, if the top note is a flat, a lot of times we're probably looking at a minor second. However, you still got to be careful when you're hitting E, right? Because this is a major second, but this is actually a minor second, because remember, we don't have that black key in there. So you still got to be careful whenever you're dealing with E or B because of that relationship. But basically anywhere else, if you see a flat on that top note, you know that you probably got a minor third instead of a major third. And what else do you think might indicate a minor third? Well, remember, it's the same thing. This. You put a sharp on the bottom one instead. And that is also a minor third. What are these two notes? C and F, right? And it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Now what if I do this? Here's our fourth. And what if I shrink it like we've been doing the other ones? Wait, that's weird. There's a fourth. And then, well, that's a third. 1, 2, 3. Well, remember, we don't have a black key in between these two anymore. So now the distances are shifted over a little bit. So now this is actually what we call a fourth. And more specifically, it's called a perfect fourth. And fourths are perfect because they don't really have, there's another reason behind why they're called perfect. One of the reasons is that they don't have a minor version of them. It's just perfect fourth. And that's it. There's no minor fourth because it's actually just a major third again. Now, technically there is the existence of a minor fourth, but you're not really going to see it that often. In terms of intervals, there is no minor fourth. There is what they call an augmented fourth, where you increase that one. So that's an augmented fourth, and that would look something like this. You're not going to see too many of these because they're very dissonant intervals. In fact, way back when they were first developing music, they actually thought that this interval represented the devil because of how tense it is. I mean, there's other reasons behind it, but that's pretty much it. So if you see something like this, you know that you're talking about an augmented fourth. I know it's a little confusing. Remember, seconds and thirds are major and minor. Fourths, and also fifths, actually, are what we call perfect intervals. And let's take a look at a perfect fifth here from like C to G. And let's see, is there a minor fifth? Well, there is actually. There's a black key there. But I also called that an augmented fourth. And that's also the devil in the music, is what they used to think anyways. So you're not going to see these too often, but there is such a thing called a diminished fifth, even though there's a perfect version of it. There's just no minor fifth. Just know that. Luckily for you is when we get to sixth, we're back to majors again. And same thing with seventh. So there is a major sixth. And it's the one we've been learning all along. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right? And you can actually have a minor six as well by flatting that. And that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 half steps away from those two notes. And that would look like this on the sheet music. One of these things these interval qualities are going to help you with is with ear training, because when you're first learning how to play by ear and ear training, you're really listening for the differences between these major intervals and these minor intervals, and the major chord and minor chord are the perfect examples, because the only difference between these two chords is that this has a major third on the bottom and this has a minor third on the bottom, which is what gives its sad quality. So that's a minor sixth. Is there a minor seventh? Well, I already said there was, and it would look like that. So from C to like B flat. And you can find a minor seventh right away by playing the octave, going down to what we call the leading tone, and going down one more. So you play the octave, and then just go down a whole step with your pinky, and then you'll get it right every single time. And I've got good news for you. Do you remember that exercise we did just a few minutes ago? I hope you remember that. If not, you're going to have to pay more attention. But the good news is that when you click on that little gear there, oh, look, dude, they have quality, and you can hit that, and it will ask you not only what letter, but whether it's major, minor, perfect, or whatever. So let's see if we can figure out just one of these together. You can even use the piano for this exercise if you need to, just to see if we can figure this out. So what two notes do we have, right? We have third space of the treble clef, which is C, and that's definitely, let's see if do these two notes match or don't match? They don't match, right? So one's a space, the top one's a line, and it looks a bit further apart than a fourth, which would be here. So I'm going to say sixth, and going through, yep, that top note is indeed an A, so we have it correct. Do you think that's a major six or a minor six? Well, here's one, and here's the other. Remember, the major one usually sounds brighter and happier, so I'd probably go with major for this. You can also make sure by counting up, you start with C, and you go up 6 notes in the C major scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And if it lands right on that note, that you already know that that's a major 6, because you're going off of a major scale. So this is going to be a little trickier for some of you, but I highly recommend, let's see if we're right with the major 6. We did it. But I highly recommend you figure these out and get good at them, because like I said, it will pay off a lot more in the long run. If you find this confusing to practice, you can even deselect a lot of the intervals and say just practice the difference between two of them, maybe like major seconds and minor seconds, major thirds and minor thirds, and then start adding in all these crazy ones later on once you feel more comfortable with those. I have a final bonus tip at the end, and then actually before that we have a quiz. But before that, I just want to take the moment to say thank you so much for everybody that supported the channel for over the years, from the mods to the regular viewers to the memberships and the people that enroll in courses over on my website, pianolessonsontheweb.com. I just want to take a second to say thank you so much. Okay, there's a quiz before we get to the final tip. Question number 1. What are the note reading strategies that we talked about today? You know, you can feel free to go back through the video to figure them out, but I want you to write them down just so you make sure that you practice each one. Even be like, all right, the first thing we talked about was blah, 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 and then we practiced it, right? And make sure you write down how we practiced it as well. So what are the note reading strategies we talked about today? Question 2, we're going to do a few note reading questions actually. So let's go to the piano and do that. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's bass clef. That's the second line, and that's going to be B down here. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's just one note up, right? That's second space treble clef right there, C. We're going to do one more bass clef. We'll do some trebles. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's the top space, A, C, E, G. And remember, the A starts down here, A, C, E, right there, G. And you always want to be playing these on the piano, even though they don't ask you on the exercise. Now, let's do a few trebles. You know, a thought for your trebles. Do you get that? A 2, 1. This is second line of the treble clef. It's going to be right there with G. Let's test it. Oh, we got it. All right, we're going to do an interval practice session now, and I am going to turn the quality off. We're going to make this a little bit easier for this one. And yeah, I think the range is okay. So let's take a look here. Oh, what do you think that one is? Now, let's use some thinking, right? I'm going to count down after I give you a tip here. Do they match? Think about this. And then also think about how far apart they are. Are you ready? All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. They're so far apart they don't match. So I'm going to say that's an octave. Boom, nailed it. All right, what do you think about this one? They do match, but they're pretty far apart, right? So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That is a seventh, if I've ever seen one, and it sounds like a seventh too. Oh, come on, that's an octave. I'm not even going to ask you that one. They really just threw you that one. Okay, so how did you do? If you got them all right, you probably don't need to watch the lesson again, but you can if you want. I think if you got more than 1 or 2 wrong, you absolutely have to watch most of the lesson again, especially like maybe the trickier parts. Say you did really good on the note reading, but the interval stuff you still need practice on. Watch that stuff again. It took me a while to get it, and some of this music stuff, you'd be surprised. Just reintroducing yourself to the material, one day it's going to be like, oh, I finally get how this works. So if you want to be the best at reading music that you can be, you need to be on the lookout for certain mistakes that all piano players, all readers make, and it's slowing them down big time. You can learn about them right here in this next lesson here, so make sure to watch that next. Your piano teacher Tim here. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Happy practicing.